Hey guys, this is Ms. Perenboom here. We are looking at Learning Target 9B Part 1, and we are focusing on finding the circumference of a circle. Okay, so first thing we need to do is talk about a little bit of vocabulary. Hopefully the words in this picture look familiar to you. We have what we call the center of a circle, and so basically that's just the point in the middle. Every point on the circle is the same distance from the center. That's kind of the definition of what a circle is. Okay, so we have the center. The radius of a circle is that distance from the center to a point on the edge of the circle. Now a radius can go in any direction, right? So from here this way, anyway, as long as it starts in the center and then ends on the circle itself. Okay, the diameter then is the distance all the way across the circle through the center. So it has to actually pass through that point. Now hopefully we can make a connection between the radius and the diameter. If the diameter goes all the way across the circle through the center, the radius basically goes halfway across the circle through the center. Therefore, we can say that the diameter is 2 times the radius. Alright, and finally when we talk about circumference, we're talking about the distance around the circle. So if we were to take like a tape measure, we would be able to wrap it around the circle and see how long that is. That's what we're talking about. It's kind of like the perimeter for other shapes, the distance around the outside. Only for circles we call it circumference instead of perimeter. Okay, so let's take a look at our formulas. There are actually 2 formulas that we can use to find the circumference of a circle. You can either do C, so circumference, is equal to pi times the diameter, or you can do C is equal to 2 times pi times the radius. Okay, this is a good point to actually stop and think about what is pi. Now I know you guys have probably been exposed to that before, and I'm sure some of you could recite quite a few digits of it, but essentially pi is a ratio. It's the ratio between a circle's circumference and its diameter, and it's approximately equal to 3.14. Now technically pi is an irrational number, which means it goes on forever without repeating. There's no pattern to it, and it'll never end. But for our purposes, you can just type in 3.14, or many of your calculators would also have a pi button. But the thing to know is that it's a constant number, right? So pi always stands for the same thing, and we're going to be using it in any formulas that involve circles. Okay, so for this first formula, C equals pi times d. Okay, this formula would be one that you use if you actually know the circle's diameter. So since we see d as being the variable in the equation, this would be the time you would use it. If you know the circle's diameter, pick this equation. Whereas for our second equation, you would use this one if you know the circle's radius, because it has r in its equation. So if circumference is equal to 2 times pi times r, you pick it if you know the radius. Okay, so that means you have your choice each time between which formula you're going to use, and again that's going to depend on what part of the circle you have or have been given. Okay, notice how these two formulas are actually the same. When I multiply 2 times r, remember that's actually going to give me the diameter, because the radius only goes halfway across the circle. So if I double that, that's going to be equivalent to the diameter, and then we're just multiplying that by pi. So the formulas do the same thing, they just make it a little bit easier depending on which piece of information you start from. Okay, so let's look at a few examples here. All right, in problem number 1, I'm going to look at my circle and then ask myself what piece of information am I given. So since I see a segment being drawn from the center of the circle to the edge of the circle, I know that this is a radius. So the radius of this circle is 21 inches. So I'm going to pick the formula C is equal to 2 times pi times r. So 2 times pi times the radius. Now I'm going to substitute in the information I know. I know pi is 3.14. I know my radius is 21 inches. So now this is just all getting multiplied together. You can type that in as, you know, in one shot on your calculator. So 2 times 3.14 times 21. And that's going to give us approximately 131.88 inches. Now, if you use the pi button on your calculator and not the rounded 3.14, you're going to get a slightly bigger answer because you used more digits of pi. I'm fine with you typing in either way, so either use the pi button or 3.14. Just know that your answers will be slightly different if you use the pi button. Okay, number 2. looking at this circle, I see oh my goodness, sorry. I see a segment going all the way across the circle through the center, and so that is my diameter. So I'm going to pick the formula C is equal to pi times d. I'm going to plug in 3.14 for pi and then 49 for the diameter, and that's going to multiply together to give me a total of 153.86 inches. Okay, notice that our units for both of these are just regular units because it's like finding the perimeter of a shape. All right, let's have you guys try this one. So you have your circle here. Think about what piece of information you have and think about what the circumference would be. All right, and so hopefully you pick the formula C equals 2 times pi times r, where we plug in 3.14 for pi, 40 for the radius, so this is clearly the radius of the circle, and hopefully you got 251.2 centimeters. All right, I'm going to have you try one more. So again, look at the circle, think about what information you have, and pick your formula accordingly. All right, this time we knew the diameter was 11, so I picked the formula pi equals c times d. Plug in 3.14 for pi, 11 for the diameter, and that's going to give us a total of 34.54 millimeters. Okay, so that's the basics. Now let's see if we can work backwards. So I want to find the diameter and the radius of a circle that has a circumference of 628 centimeters. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to find is the diameter. I know that the formula tells me circumference is equal to pi times the diameter. So if the circumference is 628 centimeters, I can plug that in on the left side here for C. I also know pi is 3.14. So the only piece of this equation I don't know is the diameter. Now this is a basic one-step equation to solve. You guys have done these before. 3.14 is currently being multiplied by the diameter. So if I want the diameter by itself, I need to undo this by using inverse operations. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3.14. It's going to cancel out over here, and I'm going to be left with d equals, and then just type this into your calculator, and we're going to get 200 centimeters. Now, if the diameter is 200 centimeters, think about how you could get the radius of that circle. The diameter goes all the way across, the radius only goes halfway across. So if all the way across is 200 centimeters, then the radius being halfway across would be 100 centimeters. Okay, let's try another one of those. Let's find the diameter and radius again of a circle with a circumference of 154 inches. Okay, I'm going to start with the diameter, so C equals pi times d. I'm plugging in 154 for C, I'm plugging in 3.14 for pi, and I'm trying to find the diameter. That's my missing piece, my unknown. All right, so to undo this and get d by itself, I'm going to divide both sides by 3.14. It'll cancel here. And when we type this into our calculator, 154 divided by 3.14, we're going to get 49 inches for the diameter. Okay, and again, if that's all the way across the circle, I need to cut that in half to get the radius. 49 divided by 2 is going to give me a radius of 24.5 inches. All right, and I'm going to have you guys try this last one on your own here. So again, find the diameter and radius of a circle with a circumference of 53.38 centimeters. All right, so when I plug in 53.38 is equal to 3.14 times d, divide both sides by 3.14, and we get a diameter of 17 centimeters, which means your radius is then 8.5 centimeters. It's half of that. All right, so before we end here, let's remember to record something that you learned or were reminded of, and any questions that you have. So please fill in one thing for each prompt, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.